I'm Jim Delgado. I'm a maritime or nautical archaeologist. I'm the president of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology at Texas A&M University and author. Journalist Bayard Taylor, writing about San Francisco in 1850, had said it was an Arabian Nights kind of a place, an incredible city, a city that had grown up practically overnight thanks to the gold rush, from several hundred people to over 20,000 people. By 1869, San Francisco was the 12th largest city in North America and the biggest city west of the Mississippi and America's principal port on the Pacific. Most people, when they think of fire in San Francisco, think of April 18th, 1906 and the great earthquake on fire. But San Francisco had actually burned before. In fact, it had burned 7 times during the California Gold Rush. Being a city of wood and canvas, with lots of transients going through and with a certain criminal element that learned rather quickly if you set fire to one part of town, everybody would go to fight the fire and then you could go and get easy pickings in the part that they'd left. Through all those fires, San Francisco was transformed. It became a very different place, not only because the old town burned over, but also because as the town had grown, it had advanced out over the waterfront. Yerba Buena Cove, where San Francisco was situated, was a mud flat at low tide and a shallow pond at high tide. So to make the port work, they had driven pilings and piers out 1,000 feet into the bay. They'd moored hundreds of ships as floating buildings and erected hundreds of other buildings on pilings above the waterfront. When all of that burned and was destroyed in May of '51, it created a 9-square-block area that had fallen into the sea, on fire, extinguished by the bay's rising tides, that then immediately filled over by sand became an encapsulated matrix, a huge site, a macro site of buried ships, toppled buildings, burnt off pilings, the entire Gold Rush waterfront, a veritable Gold Rush Pompeii, preserved not only in the act of being burned, but by being sepulchered beneath mud and water that sealed it so perfectly that we have found daguerreotype photographic images of people, paper, bottles of preserves with the pickles or the cherries still brightly colored, bottles of booze, some of it smelling pretty awful, but some of the whiskey still smelling pretty fine, crocks of butter and cheese, caddies of tea, boxes of, or bags of coffee, sacks of rice, every commodity imaginable that you wouldn't otherwise find perfectly preserved as a result of this catastrophe, particularly the fire on May 4th, 1851. My first job when I arrived in San Francisco was to look at and to assess a dig that had just happened in 1978. I was age 20, and they had excavated a gold rush ship that had come to rest on the beach of San Francisco in July 1849 by the name of Niantic. The Niantic had burned in a fire on May 4th, 1851 and had become encapsulated in landfill. So when it was excavated in 1978, it was blocks away from the sea in the shadow of the Transamerica Pyramid building. Kept up this interest, and for the past 30 years continued to dig in downtown San Francisco, largely thanks to invitations from my good friend Alan Pastrin of Archaeotech, a consulting firm which oftentimes was given the job of archaeological clearance, mitigation, or outright excavation. The General Harrison site was particularly fascinating because this ship had been little known or little documented, or so we thought, and yet as I looked into it and as I began the research, I found that the owners, E. Mickle and Company of Valparaiso, Chile and San Francisco, had regularly advertised. Working with the collection that we'd excavated from the ground, thanks to an incredible field crew led by Archaeotech's Rhonda Robichaud, and marrying up all of the finds with newspaper advertisements of all the ships that had come in, that Mickle had purchased their cargoes or managed their cargoes and moved them into this store ship to then sell. It was a floating warehouse, auction house. Putting all that together, finally realized that what had happened was San Francisco was no accident. It wasn't just a frontier city. It was an important stepping stone for America's desires to dominate Pacific trade, and particularly the China trade. And forward-thinking merchants like the Mickles, who actually weren't really from Valparaiso, they were two Jewish boys from Baltimore that had come out around Cape Horn, established themselves in Chile when Valparaiso had become the first great port in the Pacific. They then saw the gold rush coming, and like somebody that runs out ahead of the pass and catches the football, they and other friends had gone to San Francisco. Using gold rush capital, had invested tremendous sums to make a virtual port, an overnight city, created an entrepot or a zone of free exchange, and with that, tying into global networks of trade, not only made San Francisco a happening place that survived the boom and bust of a gold rush, but actually then San Francisco became the American port on the Pacific,